Is there anything else to say about mass shootings in America? In spite of our outrage at every new massacre, we have settled into a routine. As a result, there is a canon of essays and satirical pieces to share on social media, in online and offline conversations. We offer familiar rebuttals to Republican diversions and deflections. For their part, Democratic politicians have nearly perfected their own boilerplate language. How long before we stand up to the gun lobby, lobby? He asked during his speech on the Uvalde shooting. When will we, in God's name, do what we all know in our gut we should do? Thanks. The Democratic Party has the power to make a difference for the first time since Sandy Hook a decade ago. We have a Democratic president. Democrats control Congress. As for the Senate, it is controlled by Democrats, where a bipartisan group of senators has talked in recent days about measures from universal background checks to incentives for states to confiscate guns from threatening persons that would not have a chance if Republicans were in control. Even now, they may not have. Until the Senate returns from a fortuitously timed holiday, we won't know where everyone stands on gun control legislation, but it faces the same basic obstacles as the rest of the Democratic Party's agenda, namely, the filibuster and the rhetoric of consensus. As many weary Democratic voters are now well aware, it effectively takes 60 votes in the U.S. Senate, not the simple majority that Democrats hold, to break a filibuster and pass non-fiscal measures. And while rage at Republicans, the NRA and the gun lobby remains well justified, it is moderate Democrats who support keeping the filibuster, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema and Democratic colleagues who might privately back their position, who are preventing the party from simply advancing gun control legislation on its own. Instead, they will need the support of at least 10 Republicans, a daunting hurdle Manchin and Sinema have defended on the grounds that major policy changes should win broad bipartisan support. It makes no sense why we can't do common sense things to try to prevent some of this from happening, Manchin told reporters this week. The filibuster is the only thing that prevents us from total insanity. As Manchin knows personally, the filibuster is actually the only thing preventing the Senate from passing the commonsensical reforms he putatively supports. In 2013, he and the Republican Senator Pat Toomey co-authored a bill expanding background checks to gun shows and gun sales over the internet. The majority of the chamber supported it, 54 votes, including 4 Republicans. But it needed 60 to overcome the filibuster. It died, a failure that gives lie to the canard that the filibuster actually facilitates bipartisanship. With an extremely modest bipartisan compromise on the table, the Senate instead passed nothing. That same fate may await the bill Senate negotiators are piecing together now. There's a plot in the graveyard alongside Biden's other legislative priorities already waiting for it. And if it fails, the design of the Senate itself will bear most of the blame. The reality Democrats are loath to admit is that if the NRA and the whole gun lobby sank into hell tomorrow, the chamber would still disproportionately empower voters in the most sparsely populated and conservative states in the country, the voters most likely to vehemently oppose not only regulations on gun ownership, but most of the major policies that Democrats, backed by majorities of the American public, hope to pass. And while significantly altering or eliminating the Senate obviously will not be in the cards anytime soon, Democrats are heading into this year's midterms and the potential loss of at least one chamber of Congress without having taken more basic steps to balance the chamber, including the elimination of the filibuster or the admission of liberal Washington, D.C. as a state. Instead, they have left the American public chained to a fantasy, the idea that the surest and most defensible route to meaningful change is bipartisan action, no matter how intransigent the Republican Party proves itself to be. That's a delusion pushed not only by moderate politicians who have an interest in constraining the Democratic Party's capacity to pass left-of-center policies, but by the mainstream press, which mourns these shootings with calls for the parties to set aside their differences and come together on the issue. Guns will not be the subject of a grand meeting. The modest reforms on the table, if passed, would have little impact on the outcome of a culture war already won by one side. The values of rural and exurban conservatives clearly govern the country despite all the ravings we have heard from the right in the last few months about the cultural power liberals wield. It matters not a whit what liberals in cities like Buffalo or Pittsburgh think about living in a country where people are gunned down in stores and synagogues with legal assault weapons. An inescapable reality has been imposed upon them: there are more firearms than people in the United States. Historically, the conversations we are having now about improving the marginal situation will be drowned out by noise and nonsense in a matter of days. Armed schoolteachers, outfitting much of the public school system with traps and tripwires that are reminiscent of the Mission Impossible films. This is the blather of those who know they've already succeeded, who know that no arguments are needed to persuade most Americans. The status quo they defend is being upheld by the deference of Democrats now in a position to upend it.